Hello, everyone. World famous Settlers Lament back here again. And I would like to start by banning this Robert Patter here because he is lying about me in my own live chat in my own channel. This is absolutely not allowed. He can't just come onto my own channel and just lie to me and think he's not going to get banned, so he's banned. It is not my fault. That's the first rule of my channel, is that if I'm late, it's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. Now, whose fault is it today? That's going to be awfully hard to determine. It's hard to really even vaguely pin this on anyone else. But I think I'm going to have to go with Beetle. And I think the reason I'm going to have to go with this being Beetle's fault that I'm late today is, as we know, a sure way to test someone's worth is by determining how many subscribers they have. And Beetle doesn't have a single subscriber. So that just means he's infinitely less important than everyone else on this panel. And therefore, it must be his fault that we're late today. Isn't that correct, Beetle?
I can't argue with that logic.
Yeah, it's flawless.
Let the lowly be exalted and the exalted be lowly.
That's why Robert Patter is banned for lying. I
like that rare Pepe.
This lying is yes, so true. Oh, Distributist Pepe, very based. I didn't even recognize it. A poo actually is what the young Pepe is called. But hey, I don't care. Okay, one, cover up the upper part of your legs. Do you think just because you're a man that you can get away with exposing that much skin? Sorry, this is a Christian YouTube channel. That's not allowed. Number two, it's not okay. It's only 8 minutes after the official start time. So this is again just another lie. This is not 20 minutes after the official start time. This is 8 minutes. So you're just lying about me. You're Calvinizing me on my own channel. So that this is not allowed. You're also banned. But so what are we here today?
Mercy.
Last video we were supposed to discuss. We were supposed to discuss 2 videos, but we didn't really get a chance to get to the second one from Jordan B. Peterson about his message to Christian churches. So that's basically what we're here to talk about. And Theotokos Respector here, 21st Minion, is the one who really wanted to talk about this in particular. So I'm going to really let him do most of the heavy lifting tonight. How would you like to introduce this 21st?
Thank you, Settler, for having the stream. Yes, so Dr. Jordan Peterson is very interesting, very enigmatic. And although some might call him a centrist of sorts, he's not really a centrist in the same way as the other centrists that are labeled with that, but really says the truth. Hopefully they may say the truth always, but it seems that he says the truth in a way that is kind of half-truths. And but half-truths are kind of a different angle than other people labeled as centrist. But anyway, we can pray and hope for him that and taking courage that whatever he says here that is true comes from God, and whatever that is wrong comes from the devil, comes from man. But nonetheless, so let's, we might label him with the idea of centrist, and we have our preconceived notions with that. But let's try and look at it, discarding that, so that we might see truths that were hidden otherwise.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think this is something I ranted about last video too, but I'm really frustrated with how a lot of people in our circles just disavow everything from mainstream conservatives. Now, I mean, I wouldn't really call JBP a mainstream conservative. He's just a liberal. I mean, I guess his previous the previous video we were reviewing, he was calling himself a conservative, but I don't think even in the most stretched way you could possibly call him a conservative. But still, if he has good points, I want to recognize that. I don't want to disavow someone unnecessarily. And I really find it frustrating that a lot of people, I might make a video on this soon, I don't know, but that a lot of people in our circles just disavow everyone that is in any way mainstream and are unwilling to learn from it in any way. I guess this annoys me, especially with Matt Walsh, because he's been doing a lot of really important things. He personally is right now getting gender transitions in Kentucky banned. And I still see I still see like rando groypers on Twitter or whoever saying, "Oh, Matt Walsh is terrible. Matt Walsh sucks. I hate Matt Walsh." Well, I'm sure Matt Walsh has his problems, but he's doing far more things to actually stop gender ideology than almost anyone else in the mainstream conservative movement or outside of it.
The Groyper
So I
thing.
really hate the just sort of like reactive disavowal that we often have.
Yeah, the Groyper thing. That's probably because.
Sorry, to be clear, I was just like exaggerating with the Groyper thing. I'm not really specifically talking about that crowd when I said that.
No. I hear you. The Groyper thing. That's probably more of a personality drama dispute because a few years ago, Matt Walsh said some pretty over the top things, and Nick Fuentes responded to them, and they had this back and forth where Matt Walsh was like attacking Nick Fuentes and the Groypers over something. It was over some kind of a thing where Matt Walsh said something that this one shooter said deserved to get the death penalty or something, and the Groypers somehow took offense to that, and it was kind of I don't really remember the exact exchange.
Yeah, I mean, point taken that personality disputes sometimes cause this, but like I said, I'm just I think when talking about Twitter randos, I just sort of use the term Groyper instinctually. I wasn't really specifically referring to that crowd.
Oh no, I didn't take you to do that, but I guess you do make it's a good point. It's a good illustration. It is often personality disputes with the personality rather than any offensiveness with the ideas that causes these people to lash out, and perhaps they do so in a rash way.
Well, I think there's some serious criticisms that can be levied towards people like Jordan Peterson and Matt Walsh, and that they are more shy to talk about, the effect that genetics play in politics and in the way people behave in society, and how that affects the way we can govern and even the way we can view the church. So I think there are more than just personality differences with these types of people. I think that there's seriously philosophical and ideological disagreements as well. And to just kind of brush that over would be a little silly. And I also don't think.
I agree.
Jordan,
I definitely, we're not here to talk about Walsh. That was just an example I was bringing up.
Yeah. Well, I was also going to circle back around.
But with Peterson, I mean, I generally have a negative view of Peterson.
Yeah, me too.
But even with him, my point is I don't want to just because I generally have a negative view of someone, let that cloud my judgment of them entirely.
And it's
But
worth
certainly
point. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
It's certainly the common factor in this, and it's not really personality. It's the common mistake that Walsh makes. Like, he does good work in terms of activism on a small scale, but the big problem is that these.
Sorry, Dave, your audio is having serious problems right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, right now I can.
Okay, perfect. The issue is that the main issue is not personal, and it's not even really ideological. It's just how they're targeting their problems. The trans issue is a good example of this, and I commend attitudes to try to get this stuff banned. But right now, if the trans issue goes down, like, all of the major academic and medical institutions are going to be indicted for child abuse. They're all on board with this stuff now. And even, I know Matt Walsh knows this, and I know Jordan Peterson knows this, but you'll see this. We saw this throughout Peterson's last contribution, and we'll see it tonight again, I think. And that is, like, he understands that there's this extensive corruption that goes all the way through the ideology of virtually every major institution that underlines the governing structure of our society. But then he just kind of expects normalcy to save us all. Like, we can hit a button and kind of get a restoration of sanity, but restorations of sanity are based on deep institutional and leadership apparatuses that are intact, and it appears that none of them are. Otherwise, this trans stuff would have never gotten this far. I mean, it's totally bunk. Even leaving aside our Christian morality, it's just factually bunk. But all of the major medical establishments have just gone in behind it with their statements, with in many ways the direction of their publications, and that's the reality, and it's never incorporated into any of Matt Walsh's or Jordan Peterson stuff, even if they individually take great actions.
Right. Yes, I agree.
Well,
in
I'm
some
sorry. I
ways.
mean, what specifically? Because are you referring to? Because I mean, I do get the impression from someone like Matt Walsh, at least, that he believes that the entire mainstream academic community is completely compromised.
Okay, but I mean that means that's a pretty large. I mean that at that point you're basically saying that we need to have a complete societal reset at a very fundamental level, and I don't think that Matt Walsh really embodies that. I think that's what sort of irritates probably people who are more on the groper side, is that they see what he's asking for is basically, like I said, a societal reset. That's not an unradical position, and then to kind of take umbrage with the gropers because they're rough around the edges, it doesn't seem to be taking seriously what he's really looking at directly.
Well, maybe he hasn't given it that deep of thought regarding the institutions, but I think it's important to point out that perhaps not one single person can embody the whole. Obviously the left is pushing for this sort, or the globalists rather are pushing for this sort of global reset, but you're kind of championing the same thing, a reset back, or not even back, but forward into something actually conservative in tradition, or whatever you would call yourself. But I don't think there's ever going to be just a single person that embodies that whole kind of reset, but rather people just performing their own duties towards that greater cause in certain ways. So you have Matt Walsh perhaps with that call in the realm of transgenderism, and Chris Rufo in another way in the calls of taking on critical race theory in the institutions. And eventually, if you do undo these bricks one by one, what will be left standing but kind of a hollowed out institution that will, for all intents and purposes, hopefully in their minds be replaced with things that are more aligned to where we want to be. And after, you can't replace a whole building. So I was just recently in Charleston, right? And there are plaques on the walls of buildings that say this building is still comprised of more than 85% of the material that it was built with in the 1700s. And that's like a plaque of honor. But you can't replace these institutions brick by brick and then have them be the same, which is kind of what we're pushing for in a large way within, more of the Daily Wire type of crowd. So I don't know if you'll ever have that one person. And yeah, that is kind of frustrating to look at from some of our point of views, where we come at it from a more bird's eye view angle. But I think at the end of the day, it's a good direction.
I guess it's a good direction, but I think that a lot of what irritates people about Jordan Peterson is that a lot of this advice, a lot of stuff that we'll hear tonight, it's designed for a world that no longer exists.
Yeah.
It's designed to be heard by a type of church leadership that no longer exists, and it's designed for an American society where Christianity is more normalized and more normal than it is in the present era, and that reality just assaults me every day. And it apparently doesn't assault Jordan Peterson every day. Otherwise, he wouldn't be saying things like this, I guess.
Well, we can.
Isn't it the kind of advice, though, that you would hear from a clinical psychologist and professor, which is what he is? And so expecting him to be more political, I think, is you're just not going to ever be satisfied with Peterson, right?
Oh, I think he is thoroughly political. I mean, he gave an entire huge political manifesto. He's political.
Yeah, and you
It's
also
the fact that he just is not reacting to the society that the radical changes that have occurred in the last 10 years.
It's also worth noting who and how he addresses the video. In the first 15 seconds, he says, "I'm going to write this message to the church, and it might not, I might not even be the right person to do it, but I'm going to do it anyways because he is taking the step into a political direction. I mean, going back to what I was trying to say earlier, circling around, he is signing up with the Daily Wire. He's now a part of the Daily Wire, which is as almost conservative mainstream as you can get really online now. Of course, with the exception of like going further centrist like National Review, but nobody reads them. So he is inherently political, and his background influences the way he views it. But I don't think that's any kind of defense for his missteps.
Well, it's an explanation for how for how he thinks and what he says. You say he's political, but as you say, he comes at it from the vantage point of a clinical psychologist and professor. So
I tend to think it's more generational. I don't think that the issue is that he's a professor or a clinical psychologist. The issue is that he just doesn't have experiences with the developments that have occurred more recently.
I think that's true too, for sure.
Well, in a certain way, we can learn from him that peaceableness, but if it's in that way, what are those 4 temperaments? I forgot. Choleric,
Phlegmatic.
Choleric, phlegmatic, melancholic, and sanguine.
Right. So if he is phlegmatic or sanguine, then let's not imitate that. But if he is just peaceful, then let's imitate that. Because remember, he says there's no point in you worrying, right? That you will not get anywhere by worrying. So if Peterson is expressing that lack of worry, then that's good. But yeah,
I would actually disagree. I would say that he's kind of more has more melancholic. He's anxious and he's not sober certainly, but I mean he is certainly more pessimistic than I think either of those other 2 quadrants that you mentioned. I think that's the big problem, is that he's coming from this place with no real foundation. And I might be getting ahead, but I mean, he's kind of standing on like his castle of sand that he built for himself.
He's gotten a lot of flack over these videos, these messages that he's addressed to the Christian churches and to the Muslims. I mean, I don't know how many of these he's actually recorded by now, but and in each one of them, he takes on a tone of like scolding.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean.
But like I said, he's like he calls for in the video, within the first 5 minutes of the video, he calls for like a adoption of truth, but as if he knows what the truth is. But he himself confesses to be a Christian, but doesn't live that kind of lifestyle. And he also says that his lectures that made him big were a psychological approach to the book of Genesis, which is just completely misconstruing the purpose of the Bible. It's not a psychological test. It's a test of faith and a test of true stories. And he, like I said, he's missing the very thing that he calls for, which is truth. And to him, I think he only kind of comprehends this sort of physical or psychological aspect of the world, and not one that's based in something more transcendental and spiritual.
I would defend Jordan Peterson's Bible series, because the reason why it was so popular was because he was able to properly translate the Bible into words that were interpreted as intellectual by modern thinkers who interpret everything through psychology. Psychology is not a very useful lens when it comes to trying to develop, I think, wisdom, but it is the language of the modern world, and it's how modern thinkers approach, or modern young people have been trained to approach new ideas. And a lot of people got turned on to the Bible as a source of interesting ideas because it was put in the language of modernity.
right. It's good that
it's kind of like a St. Thomas with Aristotle moment. The only problem is that Jordan B. Peterson, as far as I can tell, still is not a Christian.
Right.
And I really feel like that's the killer issue here. Is I'm okay with trying to use modern language to analyze these things, or modern techniques. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the Bible has a lot of depth, and that can constantly be re-examined in different ways. That there's multiple different senses of Scripture. I think that's all true. but I do think the person with which the person that does that is important. And if the person that does that it doesn't actually believe in the literal truth of Scripture to begin with, then then that I think really is the problem. And I do, I know people that became Christians, or at least came back to the church because of Jordan B. Peterson. I'm very grateful for that in a practical sense.
Well, I
But
can also
I really do think there's a serious problem with such a famous series on Scripture being done by someone who doesn't actually believe, at least as far as I can tell, doesn't seem to actually believe in the truth of Scripture to begin with.
Right, and I can actually give opposite anecdotes of people who have gone from truly believing in the accounts of the Bible to more looking at as a kind of more what's the word, modern type of spiritual practice in parable. Like, oh, none of it's true. Jesus never actually did these miracles; they're all parables, and this like very deep, kind of like. Fox deep, like faux intellectual way of viewing the Bible, where it's all just a test of the mind, and these are all lessons, but none of this actually happened. So it eliminates the true faith element in many ways, I think, and this also kind of shines in with his criticism of the church. Being an outdated institution, and he's right. It is ineffective in today's society, but it's not because the church has, because the church has failed to adapt with the times. The problem with the church that he addresses this problem, but he misdiagnoses it. The problem with the church is that it's tried too hard to adapt with the times and has not stuck boldly in its founding, which this might be a little silly coming from me, in its founding principles, and it's tried to adapt with the quote unquote times instead of forcing the quote unquote times to adapt to the Scripture, which is everlasting and never changing.
I
In
don't know
other
what you mean by
words,
being silly, David. We all know the founding principles of the church are Reformed Baptist.
Yes, yeah, that's
Um,
right. That's right.
in other words, what you're saying, DC, is that Jordan Peterson is a liberal theologian. So he's not only liberal in his politics, he's also liberal in his approach to religion, in his theology.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I mean,
the two of them are very connected.
like tradcath circles very often spend a lot of time talking about talking about modernism and complaining about it and stuff like that. But as far as I can tell, Jordan B. Peterson seems to me to be the number one most popular proponent of actual modernism. Now, I'm not an expert on exactly what the modernism St. Pius X was talking about is, so I stand to be corrected here. But I mean, River Run, for example, who I do believe actually understands modernism quite a bit better than I do, has made the same analysis. And not to be clear, I'm not saying that like tradcaths love Peterson. That's not my point here. That I don't think that is generally the case. Just my point is that that generally I think that label is misapplied. But I think this is one case where it actually is seems very applicable.
Well,
That he views religion as a sort of historical development to meet people's consciousness, not as an actual literal set of historical dogmas.
well, to speak in Peterson's defense, I was probably brought on this stream, Settlement. You probably invited me because I'm generally a fan of Peterson, actually. I think it's to his credit that he's one of the most popular voices on the world stage speaking about the Bible. I mean, Word on Fire, which is a Catholic apostolate run by Bishop Barron, published a book by Matthew Petrusik and Christopher Kaiser analyzing the Peterson phenomenon. If you read the book, it's incredible. I mean, they gave an interview with Jonathan Pajot a few months ago. And when they opened the interview, he says, I never knew you could read the Bible this way. Like, I never knew. And when we took what Peterson was saying and brought it into dialogue with traditional forms of teaching inside the classroom to our students, they were enlivened. They responded very, very well. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, Kaiser especially is a very well-known figure, a very well-known author in the Catholic world. And the fact that he said that a lot of these interpretations that Peterson was giving were brand new to him is ridiculous. I mean, it speaks to how poorly the state of the church is right now, because a lot of these interpretations, I think, find their roots in places like the Church Fathers. I mean, Bishop Barron has said the same thing. Jonathan Pageau himself has said the same thing. So, and maybe I'm looking at this with rose-colored glasses, but I see a lot more positive in Peterson than negative.
Right, right. Although I would disagree with you about giving him credit because, you know, it's only for God's glory. He can use him as he will. But perhaps in these lectures and his understanding, he's trying to strive by his own understanding with, unfortunately, according to my understanding, the error of psychology, which is a denial of the spirit. Perhaps in this striving by his own understanding, he's wrestling with God kind of like Jacob in the Old Testament, so that, well, I hope eventually he might dislocate that rib, to open his heart according to how he wills that.
Yeah, I see this as fundamentally a question of linguistics. The psychology is the linguistics of the modern world, and it's incredibly limiting. But what we're seeing is sort of glimmers of ancient insights shining through. And I see the revelations that Peterson offers really is just translations. I don't think there's anything really new under the sun here, to be honest, other than expressing ancient truths in ways that are more amenable to the very limited, the modern mind, very much limited by a psychological preconception of the universe.
Well, I mean, I feel like we're missing something there, because it's not our mission as Christians to go forth and speak some ancient psychological truth. It's to make disciples and to baptize them.
And he's doing that. I mean, so there are so many, like, you have your anecdotes about people who have become more modernist, but man, oh
Yes.
man, are there so many people that the Peterson to Pageau to Orthodoxy Catholic pipeline, and I don't is a real thing. They'll go from Peterson to Pageau to Lord of Spirits. And I don't know. I mean,
Good.
I guess I watch a lot more Peterson than you guys, because boxing him into just the language of psychology, I think, misses a lot of his recent work, the stuff that he's doing with Vervaeke, with Pageau. I mean, it's gone past psychology now, more into metaphysics and phenomenology and theories of consciousness and perception. These are things that I think are absolutely very related to the kinds of things that me, the e-Thomist that Settler introduced me as, find a lot of resonance with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come across as if though I'm like, which is what I'm currently doing. But I don't want to seem like I absolutely stand athwart Jordan Peterson and hate everything he's doing. I think he has done a lot of good.
May I ask a question?
Certainly. Go ahead. Yeah.
Because I was watching Paul Vanderklay, who was doing like a commentary on an interview that Dave the Distributist did with Benjamin Boyce. Paul is someone who's actually very involved with Vervaeke and Pageau and Peterson. And he said that he got the chance to meet you, Dave. I don't know if that's something you're comfortable sharing, but
yeah, we come from sort of the same general hometown area in California.
Well, I imagine you guys would have talked about this. Like, I just want curious. Like,
we would have if it hadn't been like a month before my son was born and then subsequently COVID.
Oh.
Right. So I was definitely planning on doing more things with Paul had it life epically got in the way. I'll say that.
But you know what I'm talking about, right? Like Vanderklay and Vervaeke and Pageau, those are people that are definitely talking about psychology, but are also wandering into realist metaphysics. And I mean, there are atheists involved on the Vervaeke side who are discovering Aquinas, right? Who are doing these retreats reading Aquinas. I mean, something is going on here.
I think that just I always never know what hat to put on, the realist hat or the Christian hat, but I think it's just a demographic fact that the Jordan Peterson phenomenon has taken people more in a religious direction and less in an atheist direction. That seems to be sort of a hard fact to ignore, even if I think Jordan Peterson's ideas aren't, like, strictly speaking, correct.
Well, I mean, I don't know how many points you're winning with DC, if what you're saying is it's causing people to read St. Thomas.
No, that doesn't really bother me. I'd rather them read St. Thomas than some new age self-help book, which is, I think,
Dear
a lot
gracias.
what a lot of people are going to as well. And it doesn't, we can split hairs over this all day. And I actually think that Jordan Peterson is doing a lot of good. I'm just uncomfortable, letting someone who his own he doesn't really share a lot of what he really believes. He just shares a lot of questions about what belief might mean, and he's a very semantic person. Like, he really wants to get down to the meaning of every word before he addresses anything, and it's all kind of left up in the air, and it's all very unknown. I wish there was someone like Peterson who could perhaps bridge the divide of translating to the modern era in the language that you're talking about, Dave, and also being a true provably through the fruits of the Spirit Christian, but perhaps that's a limiting factor. But that also leads to one of the complaints I had about the video, which is that Jordan Peterson wants the church to maybe adopt too much to the times and not. I don't think he actually believes this, but let me rephrase that. I think he wants the church to move up with the times instead of moving back to what we should actually be, which is biblically focused and scriptural interpreting like properly and really just having a guideline in a strict interpretation. I feel like he's kind of missing that.
I mean, I would say.
Transition. Go ahead. Sorry.
I would say that I feel like you're overemphasizing a bit how much Peterson says we should that the church should get with the times in that video. I mean, in particular, a major aspect of the video is that he says that like the church needs to be more masculine, needs to appeal to young adult men. And I don't think that's really something. I think that's something that would more generally be perceived as conservative than.
No, I agree. I misspoke. I didn't mean to convey that. Like I said, I had to correct myself. But he's diagnosing it as a problem of us not adapting rather than a problem of us trying to adapt too much. The church has been feminized too much. So he's right in saying that we need to become masculine and attract young masculine men and take in the men, and not only the men, but also take in their masculinity. So yes, I agree with you.
And yeah, so on what we've been discussing, or sorry, actually, Dave, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we have an open question about what was actually the point of Jordan Peterson's confused message to Christians, because that might not be apparent to the audience, and it wasn't even apparent to me on rewatching it. It's like, I just kind of asked myself, like, what did he think he was communicating? And he said a bunch of stuff that individually made sense, but I thought maybe we might want to transition to kind of sum up what Jordan Peterson was actually saying, what he hoped to say. That to me, that is something that I feel like we might want to remark on.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Theotokos Respector, how would you summarize this video?
Well, I guess I would summarize it by "Thy will be done," but I'd like to summarize it by trying to show the most correct thing according to my understanding that Dr. Peterson says. And so I might share the screen for that. One moment.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. To my knowledge, this clip is the best part.
Will aim up. And here's a message to those young men skeptical about such things. What else do you have? You can abandon the churches in your cynicism and disbelief. You can say to yourself, narcissistically and solipsistically, the church does not express what I believe properly. Who cares what you believe? Why is this about you? Do you even want it to be about you?
You hear that? Do you even want it to be about you? I think there's much truth in that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think everything he said in that clip was quite good.
Right.
I agree, but there did seem to be some narrative dissonance between that and some few other things he said earlier in the video. a lot of it seemed like he did kind of want the churches to be a self-help camp for young men a little bit, right?
Yeah, that really I think is the number one issue I have with his video. And this comes back to what we were talking about previously with why I think it's so big of an issue to have such a major Christian influence in our culture be a non-Christian, again, as far as I can tell. And that is that yeah, I mean the entire video, again, this seems like modernism to me. It seems like he's advocating religion purely on instrumental grounds, not on its own intrinsic truth. And I mean that seems obvious because it doesn't seem like he's convinced of the intrinsic truth of Christianity.
Yeah. So what more do you want? I mean, like he's not a modernist because he's not a Christian.
Well,
So-
yeah, I mean I think that's a pretty damning criticism then.
Yeah, I would say that if we were to go to the kind of the sort of contradiction that Dave pointed out between wanting it not really being about what people believe and wanting the churches to become self-help group. I think what Jordan B. Peterson is trying to get at is that the purpose of the churches is to provide meaning for these young men because it is psychologically healthy for these young men to have a sense of purpose and a sense of moral duty. You know, it's sort of the extension of the whole clean your room bucko thing that made Jordan Peterson so popular amongst these young men who, for a lot of the time, they've been mired in this kind of liberalism where they're told that there is nothing there is no meaning outside of what is all about you. There's no meaning outside of narcissism and hedonism, and so the purpose of the church in Jordan Peterson's eyes is to call people out of themselves and into serving something higher than themselves. And that's supposed to be psychologically healthy. I think he is correct in that on an objective level, and perhaps even on a subjective level, God is going to bring people to happy is the one thing that can fulfill us, because without God there's a hole in our heart, a yawning chasm that can never be filled. And Peterson, he might not believe in God, but he certainly sees the effects that religion has, and I think he does believe in that, in some sense, that God is necessary.
I mean, this
Really?
is sort of the roiling pit that's sort of devouring the entire distant right, or the entire right wing, properly understood generally, which is the equivalent to the distant right, how I use it. Everyone's trying to come up with this and you see this in Yarvin too, right? And BAP and so the vitalists. Everyone's trying to come up with this minimum viable religion. Have anyone heard about this? Like,
right, that's Vervaeke. Yep.
Yeah, and
the religion that's not a religion.
Well, I mean, I think that they accept religion in a pinch, but the problem is that, and I struggle with this in my own mind too, is that you can prove to yourself that you need something that looks like Christianity, but that's not going to actually make you believe it. And the whole concept of a viable religion presupposes sincere belief, and no amount of these psychologization. I mean, these psychologizations and these apologetics, they're excellent for sort of breaking down the boundaries. Like modernity itself puts barriers in place for our belief that largely focus on things like psychology and science and logical arguments. And these things that Jordan Peterson's are saying, they break down the barriers, but they can't actually create any of the belief that they deem to be necessary or good or psychologically healthy. And so
Right.
you're circling this kind of weird place where, you know, you none of our common language. It's like almost like the spiritual Tower of Babel. Like none of our common spiritual languages work anymore. And the more sincere we get about our beliefs, the harder it is to communicate with the outside world. And there's no common meaningful language to express sincere experiences of spirituality that aren't kind of overwhelmed by the noise of just the modern world, kind of creating false duplicates of them, if that makes sense.
The only sincere language is in the word itself, right? So, well, I don't know. Well, God's will is mysterious, but perhaps, at least according to my understanding, he might demonstrate that we can look at his words and the truths of religion. We can examine it all the days of our life with our own eyes, with our reason alone. But really, this era of reason alone, you can see in it, people examine it so much, so hard, but they do not understand it, because it's not by reason alone, but also by faith, enlightened by reason, that we might understand the truths of the gospel. So, well, we can at least hope that people receive faith in gratuity, you know.
Regarding sincere belief, and I'm sure this is old hat if you've been long enough in these circles, but the idea is that Peterson is reacquainting people, modern people, with the idea of the imaginal, that religion expresses itself through ritual, through sign and symbol, and that these things, when participated on, when reflected on, lift the contemplation, lift your spirits to something transcendent. And so the idea is that, okay, maybe right now you don't believe, but if you participate, you will come to a knowledge, an experience of something that you would not have had if you remain on the outside. So there's a bet being made, which is kind of odd because it's coming from someone who isn't a Christian, though has come very, very, very close to making an act of faith. You know, I've seen his conversations with Bishop Barron, for instance, where he says that he believes in some sense in the miracle of the resurrection. But in any case,
But again, I mean, I feel like this is the modernist like Jesuitry of what you mean by like I believe in the resurrection. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I really hope that.
Yeah, that's something that I've been looking at very closely. I looked at, this is, you know, someone who watches Peterson quite a lot. I actually think that he came quite close to affirming the physical resurrection, but the way he did that was through a very weird kind of symbolic cosmology, Anselmian argument. It was very odd.
Let's try not to strive by our own reason, but ask for the grace of faith, because he shows the gratuity of his grace by signifying in that question. But with Peterson, with Dr. Peterson, let's hope that he might be inspired to do that. But really,
but
again,
that's another thing that I wanted to give him credit for. Sorry for 21st is the idea that he's
fine.
reacquainting people with these other ways of interacting with religion, other than the propositional, other than the didactic. I have this experience of going to mass here where the priest gives a short summary of each reading before the reading is done. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Everything is so propositional, so didactic. And what Peterson is showing is that there's a way that the images themselves, the rituals themselves, communicate meaning without having this didacticism. It's another thing that I give credit a lot of credit for making this conversation.
Right. And it's good to remember, at least according to my understanding, that Aristotle has a purpose in God just as St. Thomas does, in a kind of mystical way. But of course, whatever he says that is not true is from Satan, and what is true comes from God, because the Holy Spirit might do what it will. But again, with that error of psychology and that error of struggling like Jacob did, he cannot with his reason, no one can, he cannot with his reason attain to believe in the resurrection, because it's something that would only come by faith. And faith is a grace. It's a supernatural grace. Reason is a natural grace. So there's no point in trying to ascend to supernatural things using just the basic law of nature, right? At least as according to my understanding.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about. I mean, the general point of what you said is correct. I would say the just just this kind of didactic fill in the points. I mean, because there are so many people out there who there's so many atheists who recognize that atheism is only nihilism and there's nothing in it, but for whatever reason they don't really have any they don't want to make that step. They don't reach that conclusion that, well, I if I want to be happy, I have to abandon this nihilism, because they cling onto it. A good example of a person like this, I think Dave has talked to him in the past. Stardust, that MGTOW guy, the
Also known as Thinking Ape.
Thinking Ape. I remember watching a video of his where he was talking about religion and belief, and he was just saying things like, "Well, I'm I know that my worldview is nihilistic and purposelessness, and this is terrible. This is terrible, and it feels terrible. But if we were to have meaning, well, all the greatest crimes throughout history were done in the pursuit of meaning, and therefore, it's better if we just wallow in this meaninglessness, in this nihilism, so that we don't cause any of these atrocities like the Inquisition or the Holocaust or whatever."
The truth, for at least for a time, is bittersweet, but the falsehoods are kind of have the outer lace of sweetness of this excessive sugariness, but really with a deep bitterness on the inner part. So it really is such a tyranny that the devil forces people to remain in despair that way, because the atheist thinks he's happy, but he really is truly in a despair that is he could not understand, because the darkness comprehendeth not. But anyway, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? But who comes to fear the Lord except through the Lord? So we can only hope. But also, who knows wisdom? Who is taught her ways, right? The Father has to lead someone to her, that we may learn wisdom, that we might learn to drink at that waters. But anyway, I repeat myself.
Speaking of wisdom, I would like to get to the part where he talks about what the churches can do for men. Did you have that situated? Do you have that queued up? Because I have a whole thing that I can I can read off on that front.
Let me find it to the best of my ability right now. Maybe someone else say while I look for it.
Well, I mean, this is something that
Sorry, I think we'll get that clip now is a good time to do super chats.
Oh yeah,
Because
sure.
we've got quite a few, and actually, we just got $100 one. I don't know what currency that is, but whatever currency, I feel like it deserves to go first. Great show, guys. New subscriber. What a lineup. Thank you very much. Paladin YYZ. That's a very generous super chat. If there's anything else you'd like, send me a message on Discord. If you'd like to get another message through or something.
Man, I should really start live streaming again.
I have not. I don't regularly get $100 super chats, but this is the second one I've got. I just got another one like a month ago. But there's more. There's some others. For $5, it's tough to transition for him from being a lecturer to a pundit / talking head. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think that's fair. Though I think the type of stuff people still want out of him is his same sort of like university lecturer feel. He just does that in a shorter format sometimes. Maybe that's not really true. With how he still has sort of like pop academic conversations with Bishop Barron and Pajot and other people like that. So I'm not quite sure he has changed quite as much as he's saying here, but that is perhaps a possibility. But I feel like he's had a lot of time at this point. It's not like that this isn't like 2017 whenever it was exactly he first popped on the scene. And $5, justifiably stupid. My pushback: Peterson doesn't tell people what to do or believe. He says to be introspective and to live by principles. He isn't the strong man you desire. I'm not totally sure what this guy's trying to say here. He isn't the strong man you desire. He doesn't tell people what to do or believe. He just tells them to be introspective. I don't know. This doesn't. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong about what Peterson does here. I don't quite understand the argument this guy's trying to make. If anyone wants to respond to this in any way.
I feel like I have to put a lot of words in this guy's mouth, but I think everyone's kind of aware. Sorry, maybe this is me going on a hobby horse, but we're kind of staring down a crisis of authority where everyone is simultaneously surrendering their decision-making processes to other people. There was somebody who was posting about certain mandates that might be imposed on schools. And there was this really great graph they came up with where the bureaucrats go, well, we just draft the mandates. It's the school's decision on whether they should implement them. And then the school says, well, it's not our decision. Like the federal bureaucracies made the mandates. Like they made the guidelines. We have to follow them. Nobody's actually taking responsibility for their decisions, for the recommendations, for their actions. And so we're being a society that's rapidly being enslaved to this concept of best practices developed by bureaucrats who don't think themselves that they're actually executing any authority. This is, I feel like this kind of like justifiably stupid is kind of saying, well, he's not going to disrupt this process. He isn't the strong man that's actually going to take responsibility or that's going to tell people to take responsibility. This is, yeah, I disagree with justifiably stupid here, but I think people are just there. Jordan Peterson himself said it. People are looking for strong men to lead them because being led by weak men is horrible. It's worse than being led by strong men, and people are going to be led by somebody else. That just after COVID in particular, there's just no more debate about this. People will be led, and they'll either be led by strong men or they'll be led by people who are following best practices developed by bureaucrats that don't even understand the situation people are operating under. And that's where we are as a society. And I don't care if Jordan Peterson wants to be a strong man or if he's just telling young men to be strong men that will tell other people what to do, but this process is going to have to take place at some point. And the crisis of leadership has to stop at some point. The crisis of leadership has to stop, and the buck has to stop at a certain set of individuals, and we're going to keep on going until we find those people.
Yeah, no, it seems like reasonable analysis of the comment. And one last super chat for $5. His definition of the hyper-realness of ancient religions and mythology really struck a chord with me.
That struck me as something I heard from Tolkien, though, right? And C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
The whole like myth, but it's true type deal. That was early 20th century perspective.
If it's true, it's a forever perspective. Tolkien,
So true.
Dickens, yes, so true. Whoever it is, it's only wisdom, right? Wisdom.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
So 21st, do you have that clip ready?
Yes, I've the best of what I can do. I found a clip. We do it.
Okay. This will require you to share screen. Yep. Okay.
Thing that distant from the truth comes from a place that cannot be distinguished from hell. The Christian church is there to remind people, young men included, and perhaps even first and foremost, that they have a woman to find, a garden to walk in, a family to nurture, an ark to build, a land to conquer, a ladder to heaven to build, and the utter terrible catastrophe of life to face stalwartly in truth, devoted to love, and without fear.
Now we
What-
can
what is-
debate whether he meant to stick that theological foot in his mouth right there, but
Yeah,
Well-
it's not even just that he. Yeah, it's not even just that he doesn't bring up religion, because right, if he didn't like bring up the religious or theological aspects of the church, I almost feel like that would be more forgivable, because when he does bring it up, it's so bad that like he could at least, if he didn't bring it up, say that he's just talking purely practically here. And he's not talking about the specifically religious ends of church, which I still think would be very problematic. But still, at least you can make that argument. But I mean, it sounds like what he's saying here is literally Pelagianism. I don't know, it just feels like we're doing a heresy speed run.
Oh, well, I mean, would Jordan Peterson know what Pelagianism is?
I mean, he's
he
a
would, but he would
should.
be thinking about. Well, he would, but he wouldn't be thinking about it, right? I bet he thought that sounded poetic, and he might have been thinking more about Jacob's ladder than the Tower of Babel, to be honest.
Well-
Let's like Steelman, the guy, right? But
Yeah.
he obviously, what the bigger problem is that he wrote this down, and he didn't bother to read through it carefully and ask if this was in keeping with Christian theology.
Look. Let's. Oh, sorry. Do you want to read that?
No, that's
no.
exactly what
I
was
was
gonna
just
say,
I was
too.
highlighting that. I thought it sort of spoke for itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's like these Freudian archetypes that he kind of conjures up and it completely, removes the purpose. It's like the purpose of the church isn't to like get the woman or save your dad from the belly of the well, like he often says. It's to order your life around the commandments that God has laid out and clearly in the Bible, and to go forth and make disciples and to be baptized. And to
DC,
baptize.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I remember growing up, this being the exact type of thing I, hearing devout Christians complain about is people that came to church for purely instrumental reasons, people that came to church to meet women or stuff like that. So it's just, legendary Thomist Beadle. I really am sympathetic to your views here, and I don't disagree with what a lot of you have said about Peterson. But I know that it's just overall his view that he's presenting here seems very disturbing to me.
If what I heard him say just now, what 21st played, like if you think that's supposed to be an exhaustive account of what the church is, then yeah, obviously that's very worldly, and I have a problem with that too. And
like I said, though, he did still bring up the religious ends of it, and the way he did it didn't, did not sound.
But
very good.
I guess I'm someone who you were at the very beginning of the stream. You were talking about people who are, quick to discount him because of their nitpicks or whatever. I guess I have the opposite problem, right? Like I tend to try to see what I can work with, what's positive, and the fact of the matter is he's just not a Christian, right?
Well, this is the time. This is the time above all else to nitpick the fact that he's not a Christian, because he's speaking to this is directed not just at the church congregants, but at the fathers, the bishops, the pastors, the elders, the deacons. I mean, this is a message that's directed to the 30-year-old youth pastor down the road at Third Hope Baptist Church, whatever, in South Carolina. I mean, he should be very direct and clear, and we shouldn't pick at this, because this isn't actually good advice, right? There's this great Paul Washer quote, that Paul Washer's a Reformed Baptist, and he says, if you set up pizzas on Sunday morning and people come to get pizza, they'll stay for the pizza. But if you preach the gospel, and they'll come for the gospel and stay for the gospel. And that's the most important thing. And if we kind of preach the self-help, get the girl, improve your life, it's like, well, to what ends? And he says, to the ultimate end of truth. That's what he says at the end of that whole kind of poetic statement. He says, to truth. And it's like, okay, Jordan, what is true? And he'll go on some 30-minute tirade about, well, it really, it's I think someone quoted in the chat earlier in the live stream, he said, proof, or truth rather, isn't a destination, it's a process, which is totally bunk. That's just ludicrous.
You have to have the light to know the truth, right? But I would, sorry, someone, but anyway, well, I would encourage
I
you.
hope I didn't just kill the conversation.
No.
Oh, no,
I
no,
thought
you
21st
stunned
was
us
gonna
with
say
your
something.
brilliance.
I have something to say to that. I don't, when I listen to him, I don't see that as in competition with, like, even the way he expressed that was through the language of the imaginal. To me, that's like the advice that he gave, I like it, because I see it as, when I listen to this, I think of every video where he's talked about all of his interpretations of scripture, of these stories. I think that's, and like these two Catholic theologians said, when they took this into the classroom, they responded positively. And yeah, I like it. I don't see anything. If he was a Christian and he was saying that this is exhaustively the case of what the church's purpose is, yeah, I would have a problem with it. But my perspective is take the good, leave the bad.
Right. No, I agree with that.
I-
And yes.
Yeah, I would say that what Peterson said there, I mean, it does sound like Pelagianism at certain points, but I think I don't, the substance of what he was saying. I mean, if he were to say something, if he were to say, like, avoid the parts that say that it's all about Pelagianism, and to avoid the parts that make it sound like Pelagianism, like build yourself a ladder to heaven, bucko type of deal.
Right.
Uh,
Pelagianism is the attaining of supernatural ends without the help of God, or the idea that you can do that. And that's just not on his mind. Like the concept of salvation, the concept of divinization, that's not on his mind.
Yes, and that's the problem. You can't just take the good and leave the bad unaddressed.
well,
And
I mean,
that's
yeah,
what I feel like you're advocating for, Beetle.
I mean, it's what I would say is that all of the goals that he's describing are sort of what he's seeing from the outside that the church has done, the fruits of the church, as they say, and that these are good fruits that come from sincere belief. And I think that this is sort of what Peterson and others like him miss, which is that you can't have those good fruits. You can't find a way to engineer those good fruits. And to be fair, I don't think Peterson is saying that we should engineer those fruits. He might be. He probably is at this point in his spiritual development. He might be just treating the church and faith as a kind of black box that he doesn't yet understand, but he knows that it produces all these good results, and so he wants to see this tree grow and grow, so that it produces more good fruits that it can enjoy.
Maybe you should have the title Theotokos Respecter. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to keep it here, but maybe he should, because I don't know. It seems like William's making sense there.
I mean, that's what it seems like, right? Because I'm approaching this from the perspective that Peterson is an outsider looking in, and
Yeah.
maybe Beadle is correct that he's just this close to making that full leap of faith because he's having all these dialogues with Pajot and other Christians.
Yeah.
But at the moment, he's forced to treat faith as a black box that he doesn't quite understand yet, and he has to overcome these hurdles to understand. But he is able to empirically verify that yes, there are all these good things about religion that flow from it, like the planting gardens and conquering and nurturing families and all these other great things that the church has undoubtedly done. And not only that, I would say that all of these things are under the umbrella of putting the faith into practice, because as the Bible says, faith without works is dead. If you say you have faith, but you do not live it out, it's a dead faith. It's not a living faith.
I would just like to briefly say that I absolutely reject and disavow this. We're only allowed to be quoting Presbyterians here, not Reformed Baptists. This is outrageous.
Sorry. I'll pull out some Douglas Wilson, whatever.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you want to, if there's this kind of if I had to say there was any kind of criticism of this, it would probably be this kind of Americanist or Protestant implication that the active life is superior to the contemplative life, and we could get into that, but that might be. But I don't. But to be charitable to Peterson, I don't think he'd be opposed to there being monks and religious seminarians and contemplatives who spend their time in prayer.
Well, yeah, I mean, he of course does specifically in this video praise Catholics and Orthodox and say that Protestants are doing bad. And I want
I don't know if I'd read that. I don't know if I'd read it that way. He said Protestants are doing worse, which doesn't mean that you guys are doing.
You're
good.
worst at the moment.
Yeah, right. Right.
Okay,
And
I guess he's not saying Catholics and Orthodox.
okay,
are doing
settlers,
great.
fight me, bro. Debate me.
They're doing better. And I want to disavow this briefly. This is just ridiculous, and this I really think comes from the sort of hyper niche internet circles that we're all running in, that even Peterson is running in. That like he hangs out with people like Bishop Barron and Pajot, who both are great, and I think both those guys are far more insightful than 95% of all other pastors or stuff like that. But not that Pajot is a pastor, you know what I mean. Of any denomination. But with that said, I really think this is just complete out of touch from Peterson. I mean, it's I know I have Protestants quoting this stuff at me all the time, so I'm very familiar with what the polls are on support for abortion among Catholics versus evangelicals in the United States. It's very, very different. Evangelicals, even Protestants in general in the United States, are much more conservative than Catholics or Orthodox. And the same thing's true for Orthodox. It basically, when it comes to stuff like abortion with self-identified Catholics, it's 50-50 for both Catholics and Orthodox. And when it comes to evangelicals, it's like 75% pro-life.
Well, as the token Protestant and also kind of the more political person in this chat, I think it's fair to say there's a couple of things contributing to that, and that is that Catholics are heavily concentrated in the city, Hispanic, which means they lean more liberal. Protestants are in the South and more conservative areas. They lean more conservative. So there's
Yeah.
contributing factors to that other than just their faith. But it's also something to point out is that the Catholic Church
I know. I mean, I think
decreasing
there's
in
many.
America.
I
and,
think there are many ways to sort
Yeah.
of explain these things. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, like, that this means Catholicism is bad or anything. Obviously, it wouldn't matter how bad those statistics are. All the Protestants should still repent and join the one Catholic Church outside of which there's no salvation. But
Right, yeah.
but the issue is, like, I'm pretty sure the reason Peterson's getting this perspective is because he's talking to people like Barron and Pajot. I really don't think he's getting a very accurate view of what your average Catholic parish is like compared to your
No,
average.
the reason
Protestant.
why he's making that statement is because he's completely bought the
Insulated.
idea that the way to do Christianity is liturgically, is through this imaginal way. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair. Not all Protestants, not all
Hashtag not all.
are
I'm sorry.
these iconoclastic evangelicals. That's obviously a caricature, but the reason why he's making that
I don't know how many liturgical Reformed Baptists there are.
Yeah, come on, man. But I actually think that the reason he's making these statements is because 50% of the Christians in the continental United States, or United States in general, are Protestants, and so there's a much larger number of us, firstly, so that means that there's a much larger number of us that are making mistakes, just as there's a number of Catholics and Orthodox. Well, maybe not so much Orthodox. You don't really see a lot of that, but a lot of people that are falling into this, like, progressivism, and especially certain sects of Protestantism, Episcopalianism, or Methodists, or God forbid the Unitarians, which I don't even claim as Protestant. I mean, there's a lot more room for kind of the embracement of the woke and CRT and all of this other stuff. But I also feel like this is this hyper online and insulated way of looking at Protestantism that kind of rejects a lot of very positive movements happening. And we can rehash this. We've all talked about this before.
Remember, DC, that the Catholic Church is Christ's bride, right? So it's him who makes her spotless and beautiful according to the time and ways that he wills.
So
For his
true.
sake.
Absolutely true.
For his
Say something that makes sense. I mean,
but
Right.
but yes, yeah, I agree. It's just, yeah, no, yes, I mean, the Episcopalian Church is terrible, but it's not really representative in any way of mainstream American Protestantism. It's I mean, it was representative 250 years ago of mainstream American Protestantism. It hasn't been for a long time. The Southern Baptist Convention is far more representative. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention has its problems. I'm not saying that the Southern Baptist Convention is ultra conservative, but they are conservative.
Yeah, no, I've left SBC.
Well, no man goes their own way, even though they might label it that way. But I think,
Yes, of course.
yeah,
No, my church
I
has. My
think-
church has as a body. I'm sorry.
I think that we should follow William in a way, in that to interpret Peterson charitably. And if it's okay with you guys to watch that same clip again, and of course, only if you receive the grace for it. God's the one that tests the mind and tests the heart. He's the one that turns the heart, and the heart, almost all the time, is a mystery to us. So how can we judge it, right? But if we watch him and we listen to that same thing, wiping away the preconceived notions, then maybe we can find what truth there is there. Do you want to watch it again?
Sure, go ahead.
You should really be prepared to be
Truth comes from a place that cannot be distinguished from hell. The Christian church is there to remind people, young men included, and perhaps even first and foremost, that they have a woman to find, a garden to walk in, a family to nurture, an ark to build, a land to conquer, a ladder to heaven to build, and the utter terrible catastrophe of life to face stalwartly in truth, devoted to love, and without fear.
Yeah, I
Thoughts?
gotta say, I don't think I really got much out of it watching
Yeah.
it a second time.
Well, here, let me try a little.
Well, I'll add something. This is like the backdrop of this whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon is basically the total collapse of Christian leadership in the modern world. I mean, this is I don't usually like starting like knife fights about the failures of our church's leaders, but there's been an enormous set of failures from our religious leaders, I believe, to properly take on the political problems of our time and process them in a way that I think they're really being called to. I think they're in many ways stuck in the past, and that Jordan Peterson, I mean, he's stuck in the past too, but I think he actually is kind of like he's trying to fill a role that they're not filling. And I think that we can't really ignore that problem. I mean, he's right about that, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, he's stuck in the past. The church is stuck in the past. He's just so happens to be stuck in a more recent past.
I mean, like most churches are still trying to get progressive baby boomers back. I mean,
Yeah.
they should be trying to get progressive baby boomers back, but they're reorganizing their liturgies to woo people who aren't even listening.
No,
And
that's
certainly
absolutely right.
it's kind of amazing, to be honest. And I don't exactly know what to do with it, because God knows I'm a sinner and all this stuff, but and I shouldn't be the one to do this. I can't lead a church, and I have enormous respect for people who take on the Herculean task of doing this. But the directions they're going are just, most Christian churches in this country, the direction they're going is just so tone deaf. I don't even know where their brains are, to be honest.
Yes.
I would
We live in totally different worlds than I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years.
Go ahead.
Okay,
William, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. Well, I was just I was about to go into the whole rant I had prepared just for this. But DC, I'd like to hear yours first before I begin.
Yes. No, I was just going to say that. I mean, I was just agreeing with Dave. I mean, I sit through I go to my church and I just kind of cringe at the way we're trying to appeal to, the progressive boomer, right? And now, even in an even more scarier way, I see that in a lot of ways the church I grew up in is now trying to appeal to the new age phenomenon, and they're not adopting the woke rhetoric or any of that, but they are taking there's things that they're doing well and things that also kind of scare me. But I've also attended a church back when I lived in Lynchburg, which was a lot more intentional and gave me great hope to see the church really thriving. And the church that I attend now that I moved towns, I see as kind of faltering in many ways in the preaching of the gospel and in the the size of the congregation, which is a result of not preaching the gospel probably adequately. But
It's a tone issue. I mean,
it's a tone issue.
Exactly. I talk to not to go on a rant, but I was back in talking to some friends on the West Coast recently because we had a vacation. And I've talked to some parishioners where I live currently on the East Coast, and you talk to people who you know for a while. Everyone is in crisis. Everyone is afraid of the future. Everyone is deathly afraid of what could be coming down the pipeline in the future, and they all feel a crisis, and they all see a crisis because post-COVID, an enormous number of the parishioners just haven't come back to church. And so like even active churches are seeing empty pews when they didn't see empty pews before. And so like everyone can sense the crisis. And then, you know, you walk in and you hear the leaders talk, and it's like, oh, here's a cute story about, you know, how we're all just kind of getting along. You know, I'm a sinner, you're a sinner. It's okay.
The worst.
It's just,
Yes.
you have to be easier on ourselves and kind of like just realize that God has a plan and it's all kind of going to take care of itself. That's just not the world people are looking at right now.
That's right.
They're trying to figure out what happened to the last 2 years of their life, and no young people are looking forward and feeling like there's a bright future. There's got to be an addressing of that at some stage, but leaders just they're not trained to take that on, I guess.
No, that's
I mean,
you're really quick. That's speaking directly to what I've been feeling as I've been visiting my parents and going to the church I grew up in. It is this feeling of complete just out of touchness where, you know, they sing these songs that are more like love songs toward God rather than songs of repentance or praise. And it's just a complete lack of knowing what time it is, knowing what the moment in the culture is, knowing how to speak to it, knowing how to speak to the people who are desperately hurting, and not really reliving these fantasies of the 50s and 60s of a more prosperous and enjoyable time of, you know, in the times of Billy Graham, etc. Especially with, I mean, I think a lot of the modern day Protestant churches issues can be rooted back to, you know, those people. But sorry, William.
Oh no, I was just going to agree with Dave. I mean, I got back from church today, and the homily was really nice. They had the homily was about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector praying, and the priest was talking about how people are really good at two things: uh, exalting themselves, boasting about themselves, and making excuses for their faults. And both of those are going to really set you back in your spiritual life, especially making excuses, because because a lot of the times you can't you go to confession and you want to make excuses for all the bad things that you've done, and that's not it. But if you have to but if you're making excuses, are you really sorry? And I think that's good on it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that message in itself. I mean, the pastor was preaching about the importance of confession and how to confess properly and how to be sorry for one's sins, and the emphasis is on a confession, which is pretty good. But you it's something more ephemeral, really, and and like Dave said, it's kind of the tone issue that's really worrisome. But I think personally, besides the tone issue, I think there's a much deeper flaw that Peterson only partially gets at when he starts talking. Do you remember that part in the video where Peterson saying that the churches need to actively go out of their way to appeal to young men and go out of their way to try and get them, because that's whole. I mean, that's the context in which he was saying that Protestants were the worst at that moment. I believe, because he was trying to say that the churches need to go out of their way to appeal to young men, make a billboard, put the flyers in there, that kind of he was making that kind of rhetorical, very specific advice purpose. I think that was rhetorical and very specific, comedically specific advice. But I think he was trying to emphasize that the church needs to appeal to young men. Now, why would Jordan Peterson need to give that advice to churches? Well, I have a lot of different anecdotes about people complaining about this problem with the churches and how they denigrate young men and men in general. I've talked to many Christians who have given me their stories about this, some of whom I've talked to on my channel. But there is I'm going to read a passage from a book by John Zmirak, who's kind of this normie conservative Catholic that I used to read back in the day. And I bought his book, The Bad Catholic's Guide to the Seven Deadly Sins. And in the first chapter on lust, he talks about the new feminism of the preachers, of the modern day preachers, and he says that when the subject of lust pops up, men typically bear the blame. Male sexuality is more outgoing and external than female, and to careless Christians can seem somehow more deeply fallen. The fact of sexual difference, which God created and judged as good, and he's entitled to his opinion, leads some addled Catholic moralists to try reanimating the corpse of Queen Victoria. The zombie they revive is the late romantic stereotype of men as lustful predators and women as hapless victims, a notion that would have puzzled such biblical figures as Samson and John the Baptist. St. Augustine would have just laughed. But it's guilt-soaked modern Catholic men who've misread their Mariology can fall victim to the self-styled new feminists who peddle such twaddle, typically by appealing to their chivalry. And then he goes on to recount a conversation he had with a young, actually it was a 60-something-year-old sarcastic Yankee pastor and a young seminarian. And the argument, so it says here the seminarian. They were talking about the prevalence of abortion and its root causes in modern sexual behavior. We'd already agreed on quite a bit that women got a raw deal in the sexual revolution, which touted the horn dog fantasies of adolescent boys as the model of liberated behavior. We agreed that feminism was, in a sense, the bloody revenge, insisting on legal abortion so young women could equal the field with men and minimize the consequences of promiscuity. We agreed that many of the women who have abortions pay a terrible psychological price. So far, so good. But then the seminarian offered this theory, which I'm paraphrasing as closely as I can. Women who have premarital sex and abortions are only looking for love. Most of them had poor relationships with their fathers, and they're seeking substitutes for the paternal love they never had. And men take advantage of that. That's why, if we're going to change the abortion culture, it's going to have to be men whose attitudes we change. Men have to take responsibility for this, and they have to be the ones to learn how to say no to premarital sex. This earnest Orthodox gentleman who studied in Rome and who's willingly embracing lifelong celibacy and practical poverty to serve the church, which is more than I'd ever do, had clearly been doing his reading. Indeed, he sounded like he was reading off a script from some pious text or other he'd been assigned at a pastoral seminar by well-meaning pro-life feminists. To this I responded, "What planet are you from?" Which kind of stopped the conversation cold. In sum, I said, less eloquently, I bet, granted, there are women who blunder into premarital sex because they're exploited by older or more sophisticated men who lie to them, who promise a lifelong commitment in return for a one-night stand, and some of those girls get pregnant, feel abandoned, and have abortions. But is that really the average profile of a woman who has premarital sex, a clueless, damaged damsel who isn't driven by any sexual desire of her own, but instead is searching for pure and perfect love, dragged down by the grubby cravings of filthy men? Is the average unmarried American woman who is, by all accounts, sexually active an emotional basket case, whose father left her wounded, vulnerable to exploitation by heartless Y-chromosomed hedonists? If so, she is barely culpable for any sexual sins, and hardly to be blamed for having an abortion. We should treat her purely as a victim and not as a rational adult with free will who has committed a sin. Why bother to absolve her, much less excommunicate her? Is this the outcome of the pro-life insistence that we never foresee any legal penalty for women who have abortions, only the doctors? If so, the price is too high. And he goes on to sarcastically ask the seminarian if he's ever dated an actual woman. So I think the anecdote kind of illustrates this sort of problem with the church's sort of approach to men, which is that men bear all the men when it comes to men are basically to blame for everything, and women women have no responsibilities whatsoever. They simply are, I guess, these hapless damsels, as Zamirak I sarcastically put it. This and you see this kind of attitude of negativity towards men pervade a lot of the clergy and the church leadership, and in both Protestant and Catholic churches, from what I can tell from anecdotes. I wonder if do any of you have similar experiences?
Well, yes, I think that men bearing the responsibility for all of the wrongs is that effect of the church feminizing itself, and that's kind of something that we haven't touched on with Jordan's video yet, is that he says that we need to take in young men and kind of champion their masculinity, but also expect more from them, which is what we haven't talked about. Expect more from them, and this kind of goes back to what Dave and I were talking about earlier, which is that I the tone. I want to go to church and I want to hear that more than just we sin, but God's grace is good and He'll redeem us. I want to hear more deeply about what we do wrong. I lay the responsibility of the sin at my feet. That is. That I'm responsible for, but not that which I'm not, which is what the church is doing in an attempt to vainly appeal to the world. We should appeal to the world with truth, and we should also lay the responsibility of those negative things that you spoke about at the feet of those who are responsible, which are the feminists and the modernists and the women and the men who have let them get away with it. Not just men who have kind of been, used as this sort of punching bag.
Yeah, I mean, I think more broadly what this is a part of is a trend which I noticed when I was quite young growing up, that it seemed, not that I understood it then, but that I understand it now better, but I noticed the events occurring when I was younger, that it seemed like conservative churches were willing to adopt, even though they'd be good on, like sexual issues and stuff like that, where there's issues that are just obviously completely opposed to Christian teaching. They're not going to adopt left-wing narratives there. But then as soon as it came to things that come from the left, but aren't directly on issues that are that are obviously condemned by Scripture, that then conservative churches would be happy to completely bow down to the left-wing narrative. Definitely gender is one of those things where, like, one thing I remember, like, Red Hawk saying that like he grew up going to both Catholic and Orthodox churches, and like every Mother's Day, the Mother's Day sermon was on how great mothers are, and every Father's Day the sermon was on how fathers need to step up. But in particular, one thing I remember is getting the same sort of sermon from multiple different evangelical churches I went to growing up, where they would have the same basic sort of sermon about how we're all kind of racist because we don't have enough minorities in our church. And the churches I went to were generally were pretty white. And there were other ethnic groups in the area, and why don't we have these people in our congregation? And that was a very common sermon to get at all sorts of different conservative evangelical churches. But but yeah, it's a part of this larger trend where they're not going to adopt the progressive view on sexuality, but then they're happy to completely adopt the view when it comes to anything else, even if it's directly connected to their same narrative on these other issues.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Settler. But the reason why I brought it up was, again, I think Jordan Peterson touched on it, or rather implied that the churches were having this issue, and that's what. But he didn't directly come out and say it, and I felt like I needed to come out and say what he was sort of implicitly implying in his message to the Christian churches. If nothing else, that's probably the most substantial thing in Peterson's video, and he leaves he does not he leaves that part out. I should say.
Yeah, no, so true. One other super chat for $2 based says, I got a Jordan Peterson ad clicking on the stream. So true. Thank you. So yeah, so where are we at? Are we closing up? I feel like
Well,
kind of finished with that previous part.
Yeah, I
have-
have to go in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, I
It's
have
late
church
for
in the
me.
morning. I should go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anyone have any final thoughts then, or where are we at?
Well, I just had one thought, if that was fine, about the clip we had.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, regardless of what understanding he was saying about it, it seemed that each thing he was saying about what the church is meant to work out in liturgical act, I thought that was true, or at least mostly true, because everything he mentioned, according to my knowledge, was a commandment of some sort to find the woman, be fruitful, to work in your garden, to build the ark. These are each commandments from different times that he's ordered different people. So it seems appropriate in a certain way. And also that it's good to hope, not by our hope, but by the reality that history is a purification. So, things aren't going to be pure in one instant, but it's a process according to his will, right? So when we see now, things are impure, well, let him purify according to the way he will, But that's why I know there.
So true. I agree. Anyone else have any other closing thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it's time for churches in America and I guess in the West more broadly to pick up the mantle and actually recognize the time that we're in and speak to the issues of the day using the eternal truth found in Scripture. And I think that's something that Jordan Peterson kind of misses. Regardless of all the good or bad that he's done, or I think he's done good. Despite some of my saber rattling. I am cautious of some of the things he promotes, but and the way he promotes it, and him being a mouthpiece and speaking to the church so hubristically without really the spiritual understanding, but an adaptation of kind of his call to the Christian church to kind of pick up more of the responsibility in the culture war and fighting that by actually speaking on these cultural topics and speaking to the issues of the day in a way that promotes a conservative lifestyle is important.
David, you like Scripture?
Which David are you talking about?
He's talking to me.
Well, you're supposed to, I'm sorry. You're supposed to be called Dave, right? And then he's DC.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I like Scripture. Please quote.
Seller, may I read?
Please quote your papist nonsense.
A brief
Go ahead.
passage.
It better be from the Deuterocanon.
Baruch chapter 4.
I'm sorry. What?
It is.
Baruch chapter 4. Oh, should I
already know
screen
it.
share it? I guess that would be easier for some of the people.
All right, I gotta go to bed. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Like-
Yeah. Please, like one verse. Like we're not doing like the entirety of chapter 4 of Baruch.
Oh, and not the entirety, just a little bit here and here. Is that okay?
DC, you can go. You don't need to wait.
No, I was just making a joke about how I.
Is it okay? Just this little part and this
Yes,
little part?
go. Please go.
Chapter 4. She is the book of the commandments of God, the law that endures forever. All who hold her fast will live, and those who forsake her will die. Turn, O Jacob, and take her. Walk toward the shining of her light. Do not give your glory to another or your advantages to an alien people. Happy are we, O Israel, for we know what is pleasing to God. And here it says, let the neighbors of Zion come. Remember the capture of my sons and daughters, which the everlasting brought up upon them. For he brought a distant nation against them, a nation ruthless and of a strange language, which had no respect for the aged and no pity for a child. They led away the widow's beloved sons and bereaved the lonely woman of her daughters. So let us pray that Dr. Peterson is graced with supernatural faith in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen. Yes, that is. I would like to add a bit more to the conversation, but that is really the most important thing to come away with this. Please, everyone, pray for the conversion of Jordan B. Peterson. That's really the most important thing we can do here, and of course,
Amen.
specifically pray that he is united to before his death to the one Catholic Church, outside of which there is absolutely no salvation.
You had me in the first
half. So sorry. Go ahead, Dave. Was there anything? David, was there anything else? DC.
No, that was all. That was all. Of course.
Okay, good. So yeah, so I did have some closing thoughts. I do want to be clear because I just saw someone say, I don't know if this is a response to me or if this is from a conversation he was having in the chat. I'm not really following it too much, but I just saw this. Housewives used to be matchmaked within churches and society. In fact, that's a secondary vital function. Yeah, I mean, I agree. To be clear, I'm not saying that those instrumental things that Peterson listed can't be useful things for the church to do. I just, as I've already said in this stream, it's more the way he framed it, and the implications I think he was making, and other issues like that made it problematic. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that relationships can be formed from church. So I agree with that definitely, and I do think one vital issue that certainly many Catholic churches are having, and I think Protestant churches have this too, but I honestly have noticed this more with Catholic churches. That might just be where I live or my limited experience. But it is that many churches just want to be something that's like there to do your Sunday mass, and maybe weekday mass or something, but just there, it's transactional. You go there, you do it, and you go home. Really, I think one of the absolutely most vital things that churches need to do is really become tight-knit communities. And I really think that's absolutely vital to creating both something that will keep members and something that will get new members, is by creating something that's more than just something you do on Sunday, something that really keeps people as a strong community. And I do think a lot of the things that Peterson mentions are ways that you can bring that about. So I'm not, I'm not trying to be too critical of Peterson here. I do think there are things he was saying here that are true and valuable. But that's basically it for my closing thoughts. William or Dave, do either of you have any closing thoughts?
No, I think you put a nice capstone on it. I can't do any better.
Well, yeah. I just would like to reiterate that everything you said about, and what Jordan Peterson said about, the secondary vital functions, those secondary vital functions are the fruit of a living faith, and they come from sincere belief. And so if you actually want those things, you have to go to the source, which is God, and you have to truly love the source as it is, and not just as something that can give it, not just something that can give you these cool things. Because again, it's sort of the inversion. These cool things don't. The church doesn't exist for these cool things. These cool things exist so that we may more easily and more fully glorify God.
So true. So that's basically it. Who would like to share their channels?
I guess come and subscribe to Applied Virtue. It's my channel. Link it down in the description. Thank you, Settler, for linking it. And I know I've been a little bit slow, but I have been working hard on my next edited video series, and I hope that all of you will catch my video series on why lying is always wrong without exception.
Yeah, and I'm interesting. I'll make sure to follow you there. But yeah, I've kind of backed away from YouTube. I am running a 501c3 organization called American Virtue that has a YouTube channel. So I haven't really, but my personal YouTube is dormant and laid dormant for the past 5 months or so. But yeah, we have a team at American Virtue that produces short educational content. And we're launching a podcast soon, and you should check out our website, amvirtue.org. And you can see a lot of what's going on there, and mainly at our Twitter and YouTube, which is amvirtue.org on Twitter. Thank you for having me, Settlers. I really enjoyed it. Quite a lot.
I'm sorry. I feel like
Settler.
I've said this many. Yes, good. Singular, not plural.
Yes, thank you, DC. I guess my channel is similar in that it's been dormant. I've been graced with a channel, and it's accumulated 1,000 subscribers, I think. Even though I've done nothing really. But
Hey, you've done something. You've been my minion, and I'm world famous. That's
sure,
quite a bit.
But yeah, so I might do a stream. I don't know, but I might. So I might do a stream soon. But thank you. That's what we've done. Bye.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, I assume everyone's subscribed to you, but do you want to
Yeah,
share?
yeah. I don't need to shelf, but God bless everyone for being here.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Like I said, please, I'm not just saying this, please do say a prayer, even if it's just one Hail Mary, for the conversion of Jordan Peterson. And thank you everyone very much for joining us. Goodbye, and God save the King.